Welcome to Fairy Tale Access, where the head fairy's quest is to prove that fairy tales do exist in actual time rather than once upon a time. Together, we will unravel the heroes, young and old, who turn dreams into reality. These are the people who still believe in happily ever after. The discoveries will bend even our most cynical non-believers into believing in fairy tales. Hi, welcome to Fairy Tale Access. Today, we're going to meet the author of The Lightning Knight. His name is Sean Valiente. Thank you for joining us from New Hampshire by Skype.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
My pleasure. All right, The Knights of Nine. How did this series come about?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this series since about middle school and high school. It started with kind of a love for fantasy books. My first kind of dive into that was Lord of the Rings, like a lot of other fantasy nerds out there. And then in high school, I read a book, Aragon by Christopher Paolini, who had apparently written it when he was 16. So that kind of spurred my passion of like, oh man, he can write a giant book. Maybe I could too. So I started to think about characters all the time, whether, I was in social settings or at the movies or in school or whatnot. And I started to take a lot of notes. And one thing that came out of it was this singular character who I just really loved about being this kind of focal point of the hero. And then as I started to take more notes and more ideas came up, an idea for more characters who were sort of this quote unquote main character in their own right, not a side character, started to pop up. And I was like, this should be a series. This shouldn't just be like, one book. And a very classic fantasy trope is to have a trilogy, right? It happens in movies, happens in books. And so I started out, I was like, okay, I'll do a trilogy as well. And so I had three kind of main characters. And then over the years, I started to come up with different characters that had kind of different emotional stakes and different personalities in their own right. And one thing led after another. And I was like, this is going to be a very gigantic multi-book series. And the name of The Knights of Nine kind of popped in because it's about sort of nine different quote unquote knights. And actually the series titles is in reference to a previous group of a Knights of Nine. So it's a lot of, going into the past and coming to the present, kind of full circle sort of situation.
Oh, okay. Well, what about why knights in general? What drew you to them? Because they're really detailed about the things that take place in the arena. It seems like you really like to fight.
Yeah, so my family sport growing up was karate. My dad had three different black belts from three different styles, right? So I grew up in karate. I have an older brother. We would just wrestle all the time. So fighting is a thing that I was always drawn to, not from, an aggression standpoint, but from a self-discipline and sport kind of standpoint, right? So I really like that idea of incorporating a lot of karate values and karate themes within kind of this fantasy realm, and not just like sword meets sword and, people fighting kind of thing, but having it have deeper meanings. And beyond that, the idea around knights really came from the movie A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger, right? I love that movie so much. And I like that idea of, knights being something that people aspire to be, but not everybody can become it. And in this book, the first book, The Lightning Knight, we find out in this world that knights, in the title of knight, is not something that anybody can just become. It requires different acts, knightly acts to achieve. And so they're very rare. And that kind of makes it a little bit more interesting.
I like a lot of aspects of the story where the training was with a woman when they first started out,
Yeah.
that I loved and it makes more sense now, but I love the whole temple of your mind to knowledge, how it's filled with thousands of rooms to put things. And it's,
Yeah, so it is interesting. Like so the trainer, the woman Azel, she's kind of like this sort of sensei, if you will, to use a karate term, and she's running this group of people. I call them carpenters. That's what the name of this like little fighting academy is called, and so she's really trying to instill people with not just the skills of martial arts, but also with some of these deeper meanings. And one of those like really intricate and unique ideas is that mind temple, where you have all these ideas and they get jumbled around your mind. And I was trying to think of a way to make it make sense in this fantasy setting, but also make it a little bit more organized, right? Kind of like a computer database, if you will. So a mind temple just kind of made the most sense. And it's also like a thing that a lot of people use for memory. They put things and they situate it in their mind in a certain way and connect it with a certain word, and they're able to bring it back really quickly as like a mnemonic device. So I was just trying to take that and make it a little bit more fantasy style, and it's really interesting because the main character, Oliver Quatermain, he uses that mind temple as his like refuge, right? So if you think about yourself and when things are overwhelmed and you just want to retreat within your own kind of thoughts and stuff, how does that look? How does that feel? Is it this kind of amorphous sort of blob of thoughts? But for Oliver, it's really the structured kind of place where he can just really be with himself and have all this knowledge around him.
I thought that was really well played out throughout the story. What age group would you say that you geared it towards? Seventh and eighth grade and up, or more high school, young adult?
I think it's more high school, young adult / new adult. Definitely that was something where I was struggling to try and fit, on the quote unquote bookshelf, right? Like what genre does it go into? What bookshelf does it go into at a bookstore? It's The protagonists are 16, 17 years old. Throughout the series, they're going to be aging up, probably ending around 24 to 26 years old. But to begin with, they're starting in that young adult age range. But the size of the book, almost 500 pages, is a little bit bigger than a typical young adult book would be. So it's really this interesting mix of kind of epic fantasy, new adults, and young adults. So it's geared towards that later high school, early kind of just graduated high school, college age. But I mean, if you're a voracious reader when you're in middle school, you're going to love it as well.
Of action scenes. Why were there so many action scenes?
Well, I mean, not to be stereotypical, but as a boy, I love action scenes. So I think for me, the action scenes were really hearkening towards that love of karate. And so in karate, you grow up and you go to all these tournaments and you perform, whether they're with katas or they're with sparring. So a lot of the action scenes are kind of hearkening to that, but also kind of hearkening to that after school Fox Kids kind of like watching Power Rangers or watching these other like shows or cartoons where, action scenes kind of spur plot and spur movement forward. But then in between, there's a lot of emotional moments and a lot of soft moments. So it's not just, watching a classical, action movie where it's just action nonstop. It's really figuring out what is happening, where the action is coming from an emotional standpoint. So, I mean, this is a fantasy world, so there's a lot of martial and a lot of physicality to it. A lot of times things aren't done solely with, words alone or diplomacy. But we'll start to see in future books, different characters take different approaches. So Oliver, who grew up being a carpenter and being trained by Hazel, his first approach is, well, if something's not working, I'm just going to try and figure it out physically, right? Which is, kind of a quote unquote young teen boy attitude to take oftentimes, right? Like, oh man, I'm just going to punch my way out of this. But other characters are going to be taking different approaches, and you'll start to see Oliver mature and grow from that, teenage boy to, oh, there's other ways to solve things, and it's going to be really interesting.
I like that. I like the teamwork too. You don't see that a lot. Usually it's just singular about the knight, but the whole teamwork and the parts that they all played to make sure that their bulky friend won. That was just really well done. I love getting inside boys' heads that way and understanding that whole like friendship, relationship, how they get along. And that was good.
I think what's nice about that is you get a sense of, everything is never just one person doing everything. It's always, a team behind you. And that's the same whether, you play a sport like golf where it's just one person on the green, but you have a team of coaches and you have a caddy and a support staff, right? And that's kind of what it's like with everything. I grew up, as a teen boy playing a lot of team sports. So I really wanted to create this world of like, jousting or sword fighting. These might be singular activities with one person in a ring or one person on a jousting field. But at the same time, there's people behind them. There's people training them. There's people supporting them. And it's not, a thing they can do on their own. And getting inside the head of, boys who have emotions, have a lot of different emotions, but don't necessarily want to express them in a healthy way or want to express them at all. And instead, there's oftentimes throughout the book where Oliver or his best friend Rock will start to feel these really soft emotions. And then instead of, saying like, I love you, man, they'll just like punch each other instead. And they understand like, oh, okay, we're not going to say it, but I love you too kind of thing. So it's really fun. It's more interesting that this book is from Oliver's perspective. So all of his friends and all of the people you see are kind of a reflection of how he thinks they are, where they actually might have a lot of deeper layers to them, but he doesn't really see them. He just sees, he sees Rock as his big giant friend who's really strong and, not the smartest person in the world, but, kind of like just one note. And really, in future books, we'll see, hey, these characters are actually deeper. Just Oliver didn't know them because he's a dumb teen boy.
So the first book's written more in the first person. Is that going to change throughout the series?
So the series format is actually really unique, and it's definitely going to be interesting how people take it. So each book is split into two parts. The first part is really first person inside the head of the character. And then the second part is third person. And this is really like pushing the plot forward and seeing things from like a bird's eye view. Each subsequent book is going to be featuring a different main character who essentially Oliver is meeting. So the second book, the first half of it is going to be from the first person point of view of not Oliver. You won't even hear about Oliver for, half a book. And then when you get to the second part, they're going to meet Oliver, and then that story is going to continue. And that will happen in subsequent books as well. So each book is really a different character, and characters from previous books are all meeting together, and the plot is moving forward, and you're really going to get to understand not only different perspectives of what may have happened in previous books, but also different personalities of different characters. So it's going to be really interesting. So this first book is really Oliver's book, and the next book, he's more of a supporting role to a different character. But you're still going to get a lot of Oliver. You're still going to get a lot of the characters you met in the first book, just different viewpoints and different ways of looking at it. It's going to be really interesting.
It was really interesting. How does your love of Star Wars fit into this?
So you're going to see a lot of kind of hints or nods to Star Wars. I dedicated my book to it along with my wife. So you can tell how much I love Star Wars. So, kind of a big thing is I really liked the idea of the story of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Luke Skywalker, with Obi-Wan Kenobi training Luke Skywalker. But in Star Wars, you see it kind of from Luke Skywalker's perspective. And in this book, Oliver is sort of the Obi-Wan Kenobi, and he's trying to train a young boy named Poe, who is the Luke Skywalker of the story. But the entire story is from Oliver's perspective. So you're really seeing like, hey, what's this actually like from the perspective of the trainer and not the hero, right? The quote unquote hero story. Well, let's see what it's like from Obi-Wan's perspective. And then to take it further, what if Obi-Wan didn't know anything about, magic or anything like that, and he's supposed to be training Poe? So I thought that was a really nice little twist on how that could come about. And beyond that, I have at the end of the book, not to spoil anything, it's not a huge spoiler, but at the end of the book, there's a lightsaber-esque type sword from lightning that's activated. And so that's kind of another nod to Star Wars in and of itself. So there's always like these little hints and themes of Star Wars, which is really fun because Star Wars itself is not only just a sci-fi story, but it's also a fantasy story. So a lot of times you're able to kind of connect to it, even though it might not seem like it one-to-one.
Definitely. What about the world building? Since you've lived pretty much on the East Coast of the United States, how did you come about the world building? Do you travel a lot? Is there someplace in particular that helped you come up with this area of the world that we're in?
Yeah, it's actually it's interesting because I grew up on the East Coast. A lot of fantasy books will take a West Coast perspective, kind of a Europeanized perspective, and I really wanted to flip that and take a more East Coast perspective. So my map and my world, the country of Soroya, is actually similarly geographic. Placed to the United States itself. So Starfall, where Oliver is actually sort of in like this peninsula type Florida area. And you can see sort of the Gulf Coast and the eastern coastline as well on the map. So that's sort of the broad perspective of how I wanted the world to start. I really like the idea of that sort of west of the Mississippi, east of the Mississippi sort of area to play around with. Beyond that, I love to travel. So I've taken a lot of vacations, especially to Florida, but also into the Caribbean and to Europe. And I really wanted my world to be diverse and interconnecting. So not just have like one terrain of like forests, but like have like plains and have like mountains and have sea coast and have islands off the south. So Dragon Treasure Islands is kind of like a Cuba, if you will, just off the coast, very big. But I also made it a little bit like the islands in Jurassic Park, where there's like 5 different islands and they're all really close to each other. So it's really taken these different places I've been to and also sprinkling in sort of where I live currently.
How long did it take you to write the first one? Because it is 500 pages. So your readers aren't like, it isn't too short where you're like, I can't wait for the next book. It's long enough to keep you tuned in, where you can take breaks, get back to it, and really dig into it.
Yeah. So I probably spent a decade just taking notes with ideas in my phone and on my computer. And I would retell the story of all these different stories I had to all my friends. And one of my best friends, Paige, she sat me down one July 4th and she was just like, turned off the TV. We were watching, I think, Glow. And she turned it off and said, we're just going to write for 30 minutes, go. And then I just started writing. And then all of a sudden it was like it all came out of me, like the dam had broken. So after that, I just started writing every day and every night, whenever I had free time after work. And it probably took me about 4 months to write the first draft. Um, Basically writing almost every day. Uh, and that first draft is very, very different than what the final product was. So I've done probably 3 full complete drafts with, a lot of it rewritten, a lot of it moved around and stuff. Um, and the entire process from when I started writing on that July 4th to when it was published was about 2.5 years. I found that taking time away from the writing allowed me to kind of marinate in the ideas and absorb what I've written and say, oh, I actually think it would be better if I did this, or oh, here's a different idea to really connect. So I can't overemphasize how that time away or that those breaks from stepping away from the writing was actually super helpful into creating a better final version of it. But writing can be tough. I never ran into writer's block. For me, it was I was watching a TV series, and then I was just transcribing what was happening. So everything that was happening was very new to me and exciting. I was like, I know where they have to end up. Excuse me. I know point A to point B. I know those 2 points, but I don't know what's happening in between. And sometimes we take these random winding roads to get there, and it was pretty exciting. For instance, the character Poe, who is integral to the entire book, I had never thought of him before. Before writing the, I think, third chapter, I had never even thought of Poe. And then one day I was writing and I was watching Oliver and Rock stand in school, watching all these new kind of freshmen walk in. And all of a sudden Poe popped up and I was like, wow, here's a really fun new character for me to dive into.
What do you do for a job full time?
I'm a finance and accounting professional for a tech company. So that's basically what I've done my entire career. I work for smaller tech companies. I work for a larger tech company right now. But that's where a lot of times you'll see sort of the business kind of perspective of things or words or the organizational aspects of things within the book. And that's really coming from being an accountant and wanting things to, match perfectly.
It was really fun. It was almost like a coming of age story with fantasy and fighting and all of that stuff mixed in. It was an adventure. And there was always a quest. I love that about the whole boy thing that, could be a normal part of life and they made it into a quest.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me growing up, because Oliver has a lot of kind of my personality in him. So for me growing up, a lot of it was, taking the mundane of what life is and just saying, how can I make this interesting and fun? And that's really what Oliver does, right? He has these quote unquote quests. Some of them are these big grand ideas that he's, bestowed upon, like saving and finding magic. And some of them are like, hey, I want to go out with this girl. That's going to be my quest, trying to figure out how to date her, sort of thing. And that's just how his mind works, right? It's very like organized, like, oh, I want this to happen. I will make it a quest. And I think that's really funny and fun. And it's definitely like how I thought of things growing up and how I still think of things. But also I think how a lot of, boys think of things as well. Like, how can I make this into a game?
Right. I think that happens a lot. And it just made you chuckle, especially from a girl's point of view reading it, because we're like, yeah, I know guys like that.
Yeah. It's it's funny because Oliver is definitely a quote unquote dumb boy. Like, there are things that are very in your face. Like, how do you not notice this? And he is just like dumbstruck, like, oh, I didn't see this at all. Particularly some of the twists that you get at the end, and the reveals and stuff. You're just like, Oliver, it's been right in front of you the entire time. How do you not notice it? But that's how it goes. You're a teenage, whether you're a boy or a girl, or non-gender binary. You're a teenager. You have all of these feelings. You have all of these ideas and emotions, and you have these really big thoughts, but you're just a teenager and you're saying, okay, I want to do these big things, but how do I do them? And oftentimes you're not, mature enough to understand, like, how to go about it, or if that's even the thing to do. So I think that's what I was trying to capture in the book.
You definitely captured that, and the repercussions and the stumbles and getting back up and just to keep going. That was a constant theme. I really like that. The way that, they were going to do things together and they were just going to keep going forward.
Yeah, I think for me, especially growing up in a lot of team-oriented settings, where I experienced a lot of failure in one sport and a lot of success in another sport. It's really about pushing through adversity and making sure that you're not alone, right? Whether you're in a team setting or whether you're just in life, right? You have your family, you have your friends, you have some type of support group saying, "Hey, we're in this together." And I think that's something Oliver sees and wants to push forward through, but also is just like, hey, sometimes I don't know how to act because I'm not mature enough to understand these feelings.
That's definitely true. It was really well done and it was enjoyable. I'm looking
Thank
forward
you.
to the next 2 that'll go in the series. Are you working on anything new after this series?
Yeah, so I have an idea for a middle grade fantasy series that is kind of one part Magic Treehouse and one part a Disney Channel show, The Jersey. So that'll be pretty interesting. I have kind of like a 20-book middle grade sort of series in my head that I'll be working on after this.
That sounds great. And if you guys, thank you for all the information today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, my pleasure. Until next time, keep asking questions. And if you need a quest and you want to hang out with some really great guys muddling their way through it, the Lightning Knights or the Knights of Nine series is definitely the way to go.